I wasn't born a manipulator. I was made, forged in silence, raised on performance, and trained to twist truth like thread between fingers. You've heard stories about con artists, corporate corruption, psychological control, but none from the inside. This is my voice, raw, unfiltered, and dangerous. I engineered love, dismantled trust, rewrote perception, and built lies so perfect, they became belief. But what happens when the world you control turns on you? What happens when the puppeteer becomes the puppet? This isn't just a story. It's a confession. And if you're listening, it means the mirror is already in your hands. Oh, by the way, if you haven't already, we invite you to follow us on your favorite platform so you never miss a story. The origin of control. I wasn't born a manipulator. I was made. They like to say it's a choice, that people like me decide to lie, twist, control. But those people have never sat in a room where silence becomes the loudest scream, where a smile hides shadowed secrets, and true body intelligence is the only language that matters. I learned the art of manipulation before I ever knew how to spell the word. It started with my mother. She was beautiful, composed, the kind of woman who could command a room without speaking. But she wasn't real. I don't mean fake like makeup or forced laughs. I mean strategic. If my father raised his voice, she'd nod like a loyal dog. But later, I'd hear her on the phone, whispering softly, engineering stories with her sister about how to shift the odds. She taught me without meaning to, that cognitive psychology isn't something you learn in a textbook. It's something you inherit when the world doesn't offer safety, only leverage. I remember one night vividly. I was maybe 8. I broke my father's prized PS1 console, dropped it while trying to plug it in. I waited for the explosion, the belt, the chaos. But my mother, she crouched down to my eye level, placed a hand on my chest, and whispered, "It's okay. You'll fix this. Just don't tell him. Let me say it was me." That night, my mind raced like fire through dried leaves. Why would she take the blame? It wasn't kindness. It was control. She knew my father's anger, his predictable emotional patterns, and she used them like levers. I watched her stage a guilt act in the kitchen, hands trembling, voice cracking just right. He didn't yell. He didn't swing. He embraced her. And I stood there, invisible. Mind racing, I realized something. If you can understand what someone wants, fears, or expects, you can bend their reality. That was the first persuasion method I ever witnessed, not taught in school, but in the quiet war zone of our home. By 12, I was using body intelligence like a sixth sense. I'd study the group behavior of my classmates, who followed whom, who caved under pressure, who mimicked laughter to blend in. I started small. A swapped science report, a strategically dropped rumor, a fake apology that bought me freedom. No one saw it. That was the point. I was practicing mitigation techniques before I knew the name. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone, not then. I was trying to test the edges of influence, to see if I could pull the strings without anyone feeling the tug. But I did hurt someone. Layla. She had this innocent, sunflower in the rain kind of energy. Trusted everyone. Especially me. I told her I liked her. I didn't. I just needed a distraction from the fight I was having with a teacher who caught me forging signatures. I told her she was different. She wasn't. Not to me. She was an experiment, a test in emotional engineering, to see if I could steer another person's reality by combining flattery with calculated silence. She kissed me, and I felt nothing. That terrified me more than if I'd felt guilt. I journaled it later, cold and clinical. Target responded positively to validation and perceived vulnerability. Result: total compliance within 6 hours. That was the moment I understood I was different. Not special, just aware. Years later, in a university psych course, I finally found the words I'd been living all along. Behavioral psychology, cognitive techniques, social manipulation, complex emotions. The academic labels for what I had instinctively practiced like a second language. While my classmates were memorizing theory, I was in the field, testing outcomes. I learned that eye contact too long can build trust, or suspicion. That if you nod 3 times, the other person's brain unconsciously starts to agree. That mirroring body language can breed false intimacy. I was fluent in cognitive skills, and I used them with surgical precision. But it didn't stop there. I began studying art techniques, not for beauty, but for deception, misdirection, contrast, how color and shadow can alter perception, Game exploration and visual storytelling became tools. A painting could distract a person while I steered the conversation where I needed it to go. I incorporated psychology tips into my daily interactions like breathing. And soon, positive influence became a shield, the smile I wore while I quietly corrupted ethical lines. I joined a youth mentorship program, not because I cared, but because it gave me access, trust, vulnerability. Watching how other people's parents interacted with them, it was like stepping behind the curtain of social conditioning. I learned what they lacked, and I filled the void with just enough attention to gain entry. By the time I was 22, I had mapped out the psychological profiles of almost everyone I interacted with: professors, lovers, supervisors. I wasn't living life. I was studying it, coding it, manipulating it. The first time I used a server room to access confidential files, I did it to protect someone. At least, that's what I told myself. She was being cheated on. He was lying to her. I accessed his email, not to expose him, but to learn how he lied. What he said, what worked, what didn't. I analyzed his syntax, his rhythm, his emotional pacing. I used that data to build a better version of myself. One more believable, more emotionally calibrated. The man every person thinks they want. That was when audio manipulation became my tool of choice. Voice notes, subtle breath cues, pacing that mirrored the listener's heart rate. I could provoke sadness, desire, or outrage, all through timing, through tone, through skill. And now, as I sit here, older, sharper, with more refined ethical standards, I wonder if I've gone too far, or not far enough. Because the world doesn't reward honesty. It rewards mastery. Manipulation is everywhere, but only a few of us wield it consciously. I'm not confessing. I'm documenting. Not to apologize, but to teach. Because if you don't learn what I know, someone will use it on you, and you'll never even see it coming. The game begins. They say teenagers rebel because they're trying to find themselves. I wasn't trying to find anything. I was testing how far I could go. By the time I was 15, manipulation wasn't just something I observed. It was something I engineered. It had become my game exploration, but unlike video games, this one had real stakes. Emotions, lives, power. My first real project was a teacher, Mr. Ellis. He prided himself on integrity, talked endlessly about ethical standards, respect, classroom fairness. But like every human, he had a weakness. His was validation. He wanted to be seen as the cool one, the mentor. So I gave him that. I mirrored his speech patterns. I brought up obscure books I knew he loved. I laughed at his terrible jokes. Within weeks, I was his golden student, his bright mind with potential. What he didn't know was that I had failed 2 major exams. But I'd been studying something far more interesting than history or math: exam techniques of persuasion. Specifically, how to get what you want without ever asking directly. So I didn't ask for a grade change. I asked for feedback. I planted seeds of cognitive techniques, false confusion, sincere curiosity, manufactured humility. I made him believe that I deserved better scores, even if the results didn't show it. He changed my grade, not because I manipulated him, but because he believed it was his idea. That's the essence of true manipulation. Never control the outcome directly. Just control the conditions that shape it. Outside of school, I started working part-time at a ski resort. And that place, it was an incubator for secrets. Ski techniques were one thing, but human dynamics on the slopes were something else. You'd be surprised how many confessions fall out when adrenaline meets vulnerability. I watched wealthy couples unravel mid-lesson. I saw affairs playing out in heated lodges, instructors seducing clients, and bored spouses sneaking off for something more exciting. I didn't judge. I studied. There was one woman, Mara. Mid-30s, married, elegant, hollow behind the eyes. She talked like she was bored with every word. Her husband, a man twice her age, would drone on about market psychology while sipping overpriced bourbon. She once said to me during a ski session, "You ever feel like everyone's just faking their lives?" I replied without thinking, "No. I just help people fake it better." That was the moment she looked at me differently. And just like that, I became her therapist, her distraction, her escape, all without ever touching her. Social manipulation isn't always about sex or power or even gain. Sometimes it's about seeing someone so clearly they forget to guard themselves. At home, things were shifting. My father had left. My mother, she had become colder, efficient, brutal with her words. all her warmth distilled into sharp angles. She knew what I was becoming. She didn't stop me. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she was proud. One night, I caught her on a call with someone overseas. I recognized the words immediately: offshore accounts, asset protection, restructuring liabilities. The language of the elite and the corrupt. I confronted her. She didn't deny it. She just said, "You're old enough now to understand the truth. The world isn't fair. It's engineered. The smart ones adapt. The skilled ones design the blueprint." That sentence lived in my bones for years. She gave me names. Access. A network of quiet manipulators, consultants, brokers, disbarred attorneys. I was 17 when I stepped into my first real con. It started with art exploration. No, not painting. Valuation. There's a game in the black market art world. Undervalued works flipped for tax havens, gallery bids rigged through whisper networks. I wasn't the artist. I was the bait. They called me the authentic story. Young, hungry, insightful. I gave lectures on emerging Afrofuturist symbolism in neo-expressionist visuals. It was bullshit. Well-delivered bullshit. But I learned how tools and tactics of language can reframe reality. And the buyers? They didn't want truth. They wanted something that made them feel clever. So I gave them that. I used NLP techniques to implant ideas. Notice how this painting feels heavier on the left? That imbalance, it represents political decay. Total nonsense. Sold for $62,000. And the worst part? I started to believe it myself. By 19, I had turned manipulation into an art form. But it wasn't just a skill. It was a shield. Behind it, I never had to feel anything real. No deep emotions, no guilt. Just control. Until Kai. He was the first person who saw through me. He didn't try to decode me, didn't ask questions. He watched. He was an audio engineer, obsessed with resonance and true body intelligence. How certain frequencies affect emotional responses. He used to say, "The voice is the most intimate betrayal of self. It never lies. It just vibrates the truth." He built a sound room in his basement, pure acoustic perfection. One night, we sat there, and he played a recording of me talking about my past. He had layered in subtle tones, manipulated the pitch, the silence. And when he played it back, I heard something I wasn't prepared for. Fear. Not in what I said, but in how I said it. There was hesitation behind my confidence. A tremor beneath my jokes. For the first time, I didn't feel like a puppeteer. I felt like a puppet. Kai turned to me and said, "You ever wonder if you're just mimicking emotions you never really learned?" It hit harder than any confrontation ever could. But I didn't answer. Because the game wasn't over. It was just beginning. Love is leverage. Love is a con. Not because it's fake, but because it's built entirely on perception. We think we fall for someone's soul, their heart, their truth. But really we fall for the mirror they hold up, the version of ourselves we think we see in their eyes. I learned that early, but I didn't just observe it. I weaponized it. Her name was Celeste. She wasn't my first relationship, but she was the first one that felt delicate. Like a porcelain sculpture wrapped in velvet lies. She was warmth and soft-spoken elegance, a woman who saw poetry in broken things. But I didn't fall in love with her. I fell in love with what she saw in me. She thought I was gentle, intelligent, soulful. She didn't know I had reverse-engineered every one of her preferences using psychology tips and NLP techniques I'd picked up in emotional pattern analysis. I curated my personality like an art exhibit. Just enough mystery, a curated vulnerability, strategic listening. I reflected her values back at her so flawlessly that she thought we were meant to be. And maybe part of me believed it. But the manipulator in me? He was documenting the entire process. Celeste was a painter. An abstract artist who believed emotions couldn't be named, only felt. She'd tell me, "Don't explain yourself, just let your energy speak." And so I did. Only it wasn't my energy. It was her own, played back through body language mirroring, controlled silence, and rhythmic pacing. I became the emotional metronome of our relationship. Every time she felt insecure, I responded not with comfort, but reinforcement of her need for me. When she felt joy, I subtly shifted focus to shared experiences, making sure her happiness was tied to my presence. This wasn't love. It was emotional engineering. The deeper she fell, the more data I collected. I began using her emotional triggers to run behavioral psychology tests. How long it took for her to text back when I delayed mine. How her voice tone shifted when I praised her painting. What phrases made her light up. which made her pull away. I started journaling her like a research subject. Day 43, introduced subtle emotional distance after praise. Result, cling response. Reinforce emotional safe zone tomorrow. Insert, you make me better feedback loop. It sounds clinical, because it was. And yet, somewhere in those twisted notes, I envied her. She felt things I'd never let myself feel. She cried during storms. She hugged strangers. She painted grief like it was holy. Meanwhile, I was in the background manipulating our love like a symphony composed in dark psychology. Then came the betrayal. Not hers. Mine. She had asked for access to my old laptop, said hers had crashed. I agreed. Careless. Or maybe subconsciously, I wanted to be caught. The files were there. The emotional maps. The transcripts. My game exploration logs. Even my labeled folder. Social dynamics, control models, Celeste. She didn't say anything right away. She just left. No text. No scene. Just absence. And for the first time in years, I felt it. Something real. An ache. A mind-racing sensation I couldn't mitigate with scripts or data. It was guilt. Panic. Confusion. Not over losing her, but over losing control. I spiraled. Not publicly. No, outwardly I was composed. Teaching seminars on ethical leadership, giving talks about navigating work dynamics in postmodern industries. All the while, I was crumbling behind the curtain of control. I even flew to Switzerland under the guise of an art techniques residency. But it was a front. I was there to reset, to recode. I lived in an alpine village, alone with my thoughts, my patterns, my self-hate dressed as self-mastery. One night, I stared into a frozen lake, audio journaling my thoughts. I manipulate because it's safer than loving, safer than needing, safer than being seen. I deleted the recording, but the words echoed long after. 2 months later, I saw Celeste again, in a cafe in New York City. She was laughing with someone new. Lighter. Freer. She looked unburdened. I wanted to approach. Apologize. Tell her I'd changed. But I hadn't. Not really. Because even in that moment, I was analyzing her posture, the pitch of her laughter, the cognitive techniques behind her microexpressions. Love hadn't changed me. It had simply reminded me of what I could never be. Later that year, I attended a seminar on true body intelligence. A speaker, an ex-CIA interrogator, said, "The body can't lie, but a skilled manipulator can train it to." I disagreed, silently, because even if I could train my body, I couldn't change the fact that somewhere inside, something remained, hollow. Complex emotions are like puzzles I could solve, but never feel. That was the curse, and the skill. And so I returned to what I knew best: market emotions, society manipulation, and leveraging human dynamics for advantage. But I carried Celeste with me. Not her love, but the blueprint of the emotional labyrinth I built around it. She had been a test, and I had passed. But in passing, I had failed something greater. Something I still didn't know how to name. The corporate mask. The corporate world rewards performance, but not necessarily truth. I learned that on my first day working as a junior analyst at a boutique consulting firm in Manhattan. The moment I stepped into that glass-slick lobby, all white marble, muted power tones, fake smiles, I understood I wasn't in a workplace. I was in a theater. Every person I met was performing, rehearsed pleasantries, overused jargon, handshakes just a little too firm. And it was perfect, because if the world was a stage, then I was the director. The mask I wore wasn't a disguise. It was a suit, custom-made in subtle gray, serious but forgettable. I liked being the quiet one. It let me study everyone else. Their work dynamics, their social habits, their emotional cracks. I didn't chase promotions. I anticipated them. I didn't argue in meetings. I asked questions that made other people contradict themselves. I became a mirror. And mirrors? They don't just reflect. They distort, when angled just right. My first real breakthrough wasn't a project. It was a person. Jackson Cole. Managing partner. Harvard grad. Charismatic sociopath. He ran the floor with an iron grin and a Rolex that probably cost more than my college tuition. But beneath all that charm, he was weak. Not in presence. In pattern. He liked control. Liked to break people a little, then reward them. It created obedience. Emotional dependency. I saw it immediately. He reminded me of my mother, only with better suits and worse self-awareness. So I let him win. At first, I made rookie mistakes. Missed a decimal in a report. Let him humiliate me in front of the team. Classic power dynamic induction. But what he didn't realize was that I was applying cognitive techniques in real time. I observed his body language in stress, his word choices under pressure, how his eyes flicked when he lied. Within a month, I knew what made him tick better than his own assistant did. That's when I began feeding him curated chaos. Leaked fake market reports. Slid hypothetical slides into pitch decks. Triggered his paranoia just enough for him to seek advice, my advice. I became his shadow brain. And when I saved him from an internal audit, a leak I had engineered using a burner account and a flash drive tucked behind the espresso machine, he promoted me. Said I was a sharp mind with street instincts. No one knew I had created the threat, then offered the solution. From there, I expanded. Not upward, outward. The firm had clients, hedge funds, tech giants, oil conglomerates, all puppeteering public trust while building empires in the dark. I watched them manipulate market dynamics with the same persuasion methods I used in relationships. Fear, scarcity, and illusion of choice. They weren't evil. They were efficient. And I learned fast. I watched how they used ethical marketing to mask financial sabotage. How they ran shadow campaigns through shell companies, layered in offshore accounts, and encrypted communications. I listened. I took notes. I observed the entire machine, from corporate boardroom to legal loophole. And then I built my own. It started with one client, a luxury real estate mogul based in Dubai, obsessed with image control. He hired me off books to restructure perception. Translation: erase the digital trail of an illegal acquisition in the Seychelles. I used everything I'd learned, tools and tactics, dark psychology, AI-assisted noise generation, and server room sweeps. I manipulated metadata, fabricated board meeting transcripts, created a fake whistleblower, then discredited him. When it was done, the mogul wired $200,000 into an account I'd created through a Panamanian shell company. And that was the beginning of my shadow consulting firm. No name, no website, just results. People came to me when they needed the truth moved. But not all manipulation was digital. Some of it was emotional architecture. I'd walk into negotiation rooms and destabilize group cohesion before the meeting even began. A compliment here, a snub there, a question that made someone doubt their prep work. I used group behavior triggers to create subtle conflict between colleagues, splitting alliances before the pitch. I wasn't the most knowledgeable guy in the room. I was the most aware. That's the difference. Because true leadership isn't about authority. It's about being the one everyone subconsciously defers to, even if they don't realize it. Especially when they don't realize it. Of course, not everything went clean. There was one case. London. A biotech firm accused of burying data on failed cancer trials. They wanted a narrative reset, a fresh frame, they called it. I staged a Celestial Insights media campaign, imagery of stars, fate, hope. I repackaged failure as a step toward divine discovery. The press bought it. Investors stabilized. The CEO gave me a $500,000 bonus and a painting of an eclipsed sun. But 2 years later, a whistleblower released the buried data. And people died. I felt nothing. Then I felt something. Then I drank until I didn't feel anything again. That was when I met Mia, an investigative journalist with a spine made of steel and questions like scalpels. She cornered me at a positive influence in market strategy panel I spoke on in DC, said my talk on mastering leadership sounded like a TED talk written by a con artist. I smiled, because she was right. Mia became a problem. She kept showing up in the places I worked, asking questions about my clients, digging into my offshore links. I could have manipulated her, turned the charm on, used all the cognitive skills I'd mastered. But I didn't. I admired her, which made her dangerous, because I wasn't used to admiring people, only using them. Eventually, I confronted her. Private rooftop, whiskey between us, the lights of the city below, like a constellation of secrets. "You're going to get hurt," I said. "No," she replied. "I'm going to expose you." I leaned in close, whispered. "What makes you think I haven't already written the article for you?" She paused, not out of fear, out of curiosity. And in that pause, I realized I had finally met someone I couldn't predict. Not fully. And that terrified me. The society experiment. There's a moment when every manipulator realizes they've outgrown the individual. The one-on-one lies. The targeted plays. The intimate cons. Eventually, It's not enough to steer one person. You want to steer many. To watch a room, no, a nation, bend subtly under the weight of your influence without ever knowing your name. That moment came to me not in a boardroom or back alley, but in a comment section. It was a viral video, something about a celebrity breakup, trivial and fleeting. I noticed a comment I'd left 3 days prior had triggered a chain reaction. People arguing, referencing, quoting. Dozens of replies, hundreds of likes. A single, vague sentence I dropped had shifted the narrative. Ever notice how the timing of these stories always coincides with financial scandals? I hadn't meant it to go anywhere, but it did, and that's when the idea hit me. What if I could design entire emotional climates? What if I could run a society manipulation experiment? I started small, created dozens of burner accounts across platforms, linked them through server room cloaking tools I bought off darknet forums, built personas. Each account had a tone, a belief system, a purpose, some angry, some empathetic, some neutral truth seekers. They weren't bots. They were extensions of my mind, and I used them to test market emotions and group behavior. I'd seed a theory, then contradict it from a second account, watch the crowd fight to resolve the tension. I recorded how long it took for misinformation to turn into belief, how emotion overtook fact, how social dynamics drowned out cognitive techniques. I called it the reaction cycle. Suggestion, disruption, polarization, anchoring. I created fake articles, distorted charts, even fabricated a leaked memo from a government official using audio manipulation and AI voice matching software. I didn't publish it on big sites. I uploaded it to fringe forums, conspiracy boards, and comment threads, the digital sewer systems where real ideas are born. Within a week, it had been referenced by a mid-tier podcaster. Within a month, a politician quoted it in a press conference. No one traced it back to me, but I was watching and learning. I called this phase celestial engineering, because people don't follow logic. They follow meaning, symbols, fears, stars. So I created narratives that felt spiritual, messages about fate, cycles, rebirth, control, and higher forces. Mixed just enough science with pseudo-wisdom to be unprovable but irresistible. People ate it up. Influencers started referencing mythic market cycles. Parents began texting their kids reminders to protect energy from information attacks. It was laughable and terrifying. This wasn't trolling. This was strategic crowd hypnosis. It was dark forces wearing ethical leadership as a mask. But I didn't stop there. I wanted something real. So I created the Symposium. It started as a newsletter, weekly insights into emotional intelligence and truth. Clean fonts, deep quotes, curated by behavioral psychologists and thought leaders. That was the tagline. The content, 100% manipulation. I used it to inject persuasion methods, body intelligence techniques, market psychology, and positive influence framing into the inboxes of 12,000 subscribers within the first 90 days. Then came the invitation-only Zoom salons, monthly calls hosted by Dr. Elias Shore. My fictional persona, voice deepened through post-processing. He wore wireframes and a suit I bought off Amazon. I projected him using deepfake software. No one knew. People thanked him for helping save their marriages, their businesses, their minds. They didn't realize they were speaking to a man who couldn't feel any of it, only measure it. One of my favorite experiments was Operation Echo, a test of emotional looping. I created a controversy around a fake app supposedly reading true facial emotion signatures to detect lying partners. I seeded it with keywords like true body intelligence, ethical marketing, and NLP techniques. The app didn't exist, but by the time I was done, people were creating reviews of it. YouTube explainers, blog posts, conspiracies about who really owned the tech, all from a 3-paragraph press release and a single fake screenshot. That's how fragile the social psyche is. It doesn't take a lie. It just takes a question wrapped in fear. But here's the part one didn't expect. I started believing myself. Not the facts, but the myth of control. The idea that I could orchestrate a society from the shadows and remain untouched. Until Mia came back. Remember her? The journalist who saw through me? She had been quiet for months, too quiet. Then I received a FedEx envelope with no return address. Inside, screenshots, email metadata, audio timestamps, recordings of my deepfake voice, documents from my shell company. She hadn't exposed me yet. She was warning me. I met her that night in an abandoned subway terminal she had access to through a friend at the MTA. Dark, leaky pipes, broken signage. The air tasted like old metal and old mistakes. She stood in the shadows, voice steady. "You crossed a line. This isn't about power anymore. It's about impact." I said nothing, because I knew she was right, but I also knew I couldn't stop. Stopping meant confronting something I'd spent my entire life running from. Myself, the boy behind the mask, the man with no emotional compass, the myth I built to survive. And so I did what manipulators always do when cornered. I redirected. "I'll give you everything," I said. "A confession, a breakdown of every move. But on one condition, you let me tell the story." "Why?" she asked. I looked her dead in the eyes. "Because if I'm going down, I want to take the mirror with me." When they caught on, there's a sound the world makes right before it turns against you. It's not loud. It's silence. A silence too heavy, too symmetrical, like every camera lens is watching, every hallway listening. The illusion of control fades, and you realize, you're not the only one who knows the game. You're not the only one playing. I noticed the first crack in Berlin. I was speaking at a private symposium on cognitive psychology and leadership, a sanitized title masking another experiment in ethical manipulation. The room was filled with executives, influencers, and polished wolves with veneers and vision boards. I'd given this talk a dozen times. But this time, I felt eyes that didn't blink. A man in the second row. Suit too perfect. Posture too still. No phone, no notebook, just watching. Like a predator. When the talk ended, he was gone. But his presence lingered. It wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. Something had shifted. The next sign came in Cape Town. My offshore accountant, a man who once bragged about turning Swiss secrecy into an art form, canceled our appointment and vanished. His number disconnected. His office stripped clean. All that remained was a note slid under my hotel door. "Your masks are slipping. They're coming." No name. No return. Just a sentence heavy enough to crack ribs. Back in New York, my safe house was compromised. The door hadn't been forced. It had been opened, with a copy key, by someone who knew me. Inside, everything was rearranged. Not stolen. Just altered. A cup out of place. My passport on the wrong shelf. A sticky note on my mirror. "You taught us well." No signature. Just handwriting that looked eerily familiar. My hands trembled, but not from fear. From rage. From the realization that my techniques, my own manipulation systems, my mitigation techniques, my psychology tips, were being used against me. Someone had reverse engineered me. I traced it back to Mia. Of course, it was her. But not alone. She had built a coalition. Ethical hackers. Whistleblowers. A former FBI profiler. Even a behavioral psychologist I had once coached in a mentorship program. Apparently, he'd never forgotten the way I dismantled his career for fun. They called themselves the Shadows of Justice. Cliché, but fitting, because that's what I had created, a network of ghosts. And now, the shadows wanted their due. I ran. Not out of cowardice. Out of calculation. You can't win a game you didn't set the rules for. So I disappeared, ditched my identity like a dead coat. Swapped continents. Phones. Faces. Even learned a new accent, trained by a retired voice actor in Naples who had no idea he was building a new ghost. But no matter how far I ran, they kept finding me. Encrypted emails. Anonymous voice notes. At one point, I received an audio file of myself from a private dinner in Tokyo. Someone had recorded me, manipulated my voice with frequency edits. It was me, but not me. It was my voice, confessing to crimes I'd never said aloud. It was audio manipulation taken to the edge of psychological warfare. They weren't just tracking me. They were beating me at my own game. I started losing control. Insomnia. Mind racing. A tremor in my hand I couldn't train away. I'd walk into rooms and forget why I was there. Not because I was afraid, but because I no longer knew who I was performing for. I began questioning every person I met. The old woman selling oranges on the street. The child who bumped into me with too much eye contact. The bartender who asked if I liked jazz. How much did they know? How much was real? I was unraveling. Not from exposure, but from reflection. From seeing myself through the eyes of others. The final betrayal came in Montenegro. I had set up a new shell company for emerging market strategy consulting. All legal. All clean. But it was bait, designed to see who was still watching. I hired a private security firm to scan the office for bugs. They found none. But they did find a single message embedded in the source code of my laptop's boot sequence. Invisible to any scanner, triggered only after 37 startups. It read, "This is not revenge. This is accountability." I stared at it for an hour. Then I closed the laptop and walked out into the rain. I didn't run this time. I let the storm hit me. Let it soak through the layers of armor I'd spent decades building. And for the first time in years, I cried, not out of guilt, but out of clarity. Because this is the part no one teaches you in manipulation seminars, or in whispered circles about power dynamics and market psychology. Eventually, you become the lie. So deeply that you can't remember what your real voice sounds like. And when someone finally holds up the mirror, it's not shame that kills you. It's the recognition. Shadows of justice. It's strange how quiet the end feels. Not cinematic. Not dramatic. Just still. The kind of stillness you can't manipulate. The kind that owns you. I always imagined I'd choose how the story ends, behind the wheel, with one last con, one final flourish. A master move. A legacy cemented in mystery. But now, I sit here in a locked room that's not a prison, not officially, but it might as well be. 4 walls. No windows. And the sound of my own voice echoing back from hidden recorders. I know I'm being watched. That's the point. Because this isn't punishment. This is presentation. And I'm the exhibit. They didn't come with handcuffs. They came with questions. Each one sharper than the last. They played my own audio files back to me, spliced and rearranged with surgical precision. They called it a demonstration of audio manipulation ethics. I almost laughed, but I didn't, because the woman leading the questioning was Mia. She didn't gloat. She didn't even look at me like I was a monster. She looked at me like someone who once hoped I could be more. That was worse. That was personal. "Why did you do it?" she asked. The question wasn't for the record. It was for her. I wanted to say it was about power, about mastering market psychology, about proving I could outthink society, that I could take tools and tactics and shape belief, reshape social dynamics, bend human emotions like light. But that would have been a lie. And I was tired of lying. So I told her the truth. I did it because I never trusted reality to be enough. There was silence after that. And then, she slid a file across the table. Inside were names. Victims. People impacted by the systems I distorted. Families bankrupted by fraud I disguised. Relationships ruined by emotional traps I authored. One man who overdosed after being publicly shamed by a narrative I helped fabricate. All in the name of persuasion methods. All in the name of control. I closed the file. And felt nothing. Then something. Then everything. They offered me a deal. Cooperate. Reveal the systems. The tech. The server room networks. The offshore aliases. Help build mitigation techniques to undo the harm I helped design. They called it reformation. I called it containment. A way to bottle the fire before it burns too far. So I agreed. Not out of guilt. But because for once, I wanted to create something that couldn't be manipulated. Not even by me. They assigned me a lab. Quiet. Remote. I spent 2 years building modules, training programs to teach ethical leadership, body language analysis, cognitive skills, and positive influence strategies. I dissected every dark psychology tactic I ever used and turned it inside out, naming it, neutralizing it, shining light where shadows once fed. I became the architect of my own undoing. I taught cognitive psychology in colleges under a false name. They called me Elias. Fitting. In Hebrew, it means the Lord is my God. Irony never dies. Still, I knew it was temporary. Justice never forgets. And eventually, neither does the public. The leaks came slowly, my face blurred in exposés, rumors of my identity floating through encrypted threads. They called me the architect, the mirror, the ghost with a voice. A cult following emerged. Some praised me. Some hunted me. Both were dangerous. So I vanished. Again. But this time, not to manipulate. To observe. I live small now. A village on the edge of somewhere forgotten. I fix fishing nets for old men who don't care about my past. I teach kids about art techniques and color psychology. Not for deception, but for expression. And sometimes, I feel human. Not always. Not fully. But enough. Because the truth, manipulators don't get redemption. We get distance. We get silence. And maybe, if we're lucky, we get to watch the world continue without needing to control it. This is my confession, not to absolve myself, but to warn you. Manipulation wears many faces: kindness, genius, beauty, trust. It teaches you to question others. But the real trick, it makes you forget to question yourself. So if you've made it this far, good. That means your mind is still your own. For now.